I have a busy day, but I wanted to make a really quick video because I don't think I made one yesterday. And last night was the first night I didn't take any Seroquel. The night before that, I took half, and the night before that, I took half. And before that, I was taking one a day for about a week or so, and even more of it before that for a couple days because of my crisis. And last night I didn't sleep the greatest. I woke up at 3 in the morning and I felt like I wasn't sleeping fully at that point for a while, but I was sleeping for sure. And then I woke up around 6:30. It could have been 2 because I went out and I was sitting on a patio with some friends and it was quite cold, and I actually didn't feel cold because there was a heater, but when I got home I actually felt quite chilled. So I actually slept with my heating pad on. So I think my sleep was just a bit messed up in general from that as well. And going to sleep a little bit later because I got home and I still did my whole foot soak thing and the coherence breathing app. And after using that app for a number of months on and off, I actually finally figured it out. I reduced the breath rate from 5 breaths per minute to 4, which is actually the lowest the app can do. And as soon as I did that, all of a sudden now I'm in coherence most of the time. Whereas before I was hovering at like 50 or 60% coherence. And there's a TED talk on this coherence stuff and some things on YouTube about when we're breathing in coherence and the heart is beating in coherence, then the right electricity, the right electric nutrition is sent to the brain. And I haven't done enough investigation to know if that's true or not, but there's people out there who created this coherence breathing technique and app and have done all that research. So when I see something cool like that and good like that, I just trust it because they've done the work, so I don't have to, and I can just benefit from what they've done. But I'm quite excited that now I'm able to do that and actually stay in coherence just by changing the breath rate. So I guess naturally my breathing rate is very shallow, and if I'm at a slightly faster breathing rate, then perhaps my breathing isn't as smooth because it's about smooth breathing and breathing at that rate. So maybe with the faster breath rate, I was having to actually kind of hold my breath or not breathe smoothly to match the breath rate, and as a result, I wasn't breathing in coherence. Whereas now it's pretty much really coherent. And to me, since I've only been able to do that for 2 days since I changed it, I'm wondering what the results will be as a result of actually being able to be in coherence in the app instead of actually sort of struggling to be in and out of coherence. So I'll definitely be using it more, I think, now that I figured out that it's not that I'm having trouble staying in coherence, it's just that I was having the wrong breathing rate. And so perhaps that will be good for my brain. And even today, this morning, I noticed after not taking the Seroquel last night, even though it was just half, which isn't very much, I already feel more clear. And I like that. At the same time, though, it could put me at risk for distress at some point. But again, I'd rather be clear 330 some odd days of the year and not clear on Seroquel or something else just a few days of the year instead of taking it daily just to hopefully not go into distress. I'd rather be in distress and clear versus not clear and maybe not go into distress. It still doesn't guarantee that I wouldn't go into distress, and I don't want to take it for a whole year to find out. So, like I talked about before, I probably have 6.5 to 8.5 months until it happens again if I don't take the Seroquel. So what do I need to do in the meantime? How do I need to design my life in order to not have distress? And I was thinking about how the distress is sort of old soundscapes. And I've been thinking about this idea of soundscapes since watching half of the first season of the show, The OA, on Netflix. And I'm not going to watch the rest of it for a while because my brain needs to settle down from these big ideas that it can cling on to and then actually extrapolate and create soundscapes of future prophecy based on that. Seeing beyond some of the ideas that people come up with in shows that are like fantasy and not really real can still really pull on my brain neurons and glial cells to make connections beyond even the show, which of course are not necessarily true right now at this moment, but they can be seen as possibly true in the future, and that feels like prophecy. Whether or not it is prophecy, it feels like prophecy because it's not true now. It could be true in the future. We have to wait and see. It's a projection of that extrapolation, and it can be kind of scary. So the soundscapes created by the producer of the show, the OA, can actually get my brain extrapolating soundscapes that can be interpreted as fearful. So becoming afraid of those sounds that my brain creates based on the seeing beyond of whatever it is that somebody else created. And that's again why I have trouble with watching TV or even watching that program Vaccines Revealed, because I can extrapolate beyond, it seems, and it's somewhat terrifying. And I definitely got in touch with old soundscapes in my recent crisis. And I'm wondering, how do I prevent those soundscapes? Or maybe what are those soundscapes trying to tell me? That if I listen, then I won't be needing them anymore, or I won't be afraid of them anymore. And I was watching an interview of Sean Blackwell by Katie Mottram, and he was talking about holotropic states, and I'm thinking that these holotropic states, and I haven't looked into that too much, even though it's probably something I should be looking into because I experienced that when I first was in a 2-month altered state of consciousness. And it's not just one altered state, it was so many different altered states. And when I finally got to the point of handcuffing myself and just staying still and laying there, I experienced my consciousness leaving my body. But in a way, it's almost like my brain got in touch with other soundscapes. So maybe consciousness didn't leave my body as much as other soundscapes of other consciousnesses, like other beings, like a bird or a homeless person. I was able to tune into that in my brain, in my mind, in my mindscape. And I was just laying there, but I experienced all these other things. And what I'm trying to say is, it seems like our brains can tune into other soundscapes of other people, other beings, past lives, etc., etc. And this is something that's not necessarily new, but when we think about it in terms of soundscapes, and how these soundscapes move us. And we're usually moved by the soundscape of our conditioned, programmed ego personality consciousness. But as soon as something else comes in besides that, which can happen when that breaks down or gets scrambled, well, then it's very confusing. Like, how do we move about in our habitual pattern when those other soundscapes are coming in? And so then it's hard to move about in our habitual pattern, and then we're acting differently, and then people think we're strange, when really we've just decoupled from the soundscape of our regular ego personality, which is a very narrow, limited band of sound to be tuning into. And then when we really think about it, these sounds come from within us. Even if we start to connect with other sounds, they come from within. And what I talked about before was when we have a clear, quiet, silent mind, the soundscape is very subtle, and it actually comes from perception in the moment by seeing. And I'm a very visual person now. Like, I need to have things out where I can see them, because that's actually what prompts me to use it or move it or whatever it is. So instead of being moved by the abstraction about the thing, because I'm actually thinking about the thing. So it feels like, to me, people who go through this sort of trans-conscious, map-conscious experience are being remapped to actually perhaps become more visual. And when we're more visual, it creates different soundscapes than when we're caught in the soundscape of our ego programming. And when we really think about it, what is fear is actually just sound. And part of this holotropic state, or decoupling from the ego soundscape that we're used to, when the process happens that we're perceiving different soundscapes, it's actually a change in perception. So perception has changed from the ego soundscape to infinite soundscapes, maybe. Soundscapes of different times, and it's actually showing us something that Krishnamurti says, that all time is now. It's not past, present, future as we think. It's all right now. But the point about the soundscapes, even though there's so many different things happening in, say, so-called psychosis or trans-consciousness, it's showing us that we're not that soundscape of the ego. So that one's not correct. Doesn't mean that these other ones that are happening are correct, but it's showing us that we're not just that ego soundscape, and we can't act just based on that. And again, it's trying to get us to act on a different soundscape. And perhaps those are all confused until we get in touch with the soundscape of perception in the moment. And it could be that we have to learn to kind of negate those other soundscapes. It's quite fascinating, and I guess I don't have enough time to talk about it right now. But it's interesting how this is my first day not taking the Seroquel last night, and my brain is already wanting to talk. It's already creating the soundscape of perception and talking about these things. In crisis, when I was exposed to these other soundscapes of total weirdness, and I just laid down and surrendered and waited for them to pass in a way that is negating them, because say I was having strange soundscapes about aliens, I could go outside and be like, oh, I'm going to wait for the aliens, and then, you know, run across the street and then get captured by the police and then get whatever. So that it's so acting based on that soundscape would create something that I don't want. I'm almost feeling like this crisis thing for me now is more like having a cold. You just kind of rest for a week, and then get on with it. And so this time I was able to avoid the hospital and utilize the support of my community and my family. And I'm wondering if next time the step would be to actually just get through it myself. I have a Zap strap if I feel scared for some reason, but I could just take the Seroquel myself and just rest up and not even trouble anybody, potentially. And maybe nobody would even have to know. It would just be, oh yeah, I'm not feeling well, and just get through it myself. And again, that's a way not to create that vision or perception of me as having this mental illness. And this might seem to go against the whole talk about it thing that people talk about, or, get help. But it's not. It's actually beyond that, in that I've learned to help myself. And I don't even need to go and be like, oh, I'm thinking this and I'm thinking that. Help me. It's like, I'm thinking this and I'm thinking that. I just need to lay down and take this Seroquel and rest, and it will pass. It only lasts maximum a week, and the worst of it is actually just a couple of days if I do the treatment protocol that I know works for me, which has taken a while to figure out. And I definitely know what doesn't work for me, and if I go to the hospital, there's a higher chance of that happening than if I just handle it myself. And then after that, it would actually be interesting to go through it without any extra medication. And I don't know if that's a good idea or not. But I remember that first time when I was handcuffed, I had my process interrupted. Somebody came and found me, and then I was taken to the hospital. Whereas maybe if I would have finished that breathing that I was doing just naturally, maybe it would have resolved. I don't know if that's true. But I seem to be naturally breathing holotropically. And that was possibly part of the healing process. But then it was interrupted, and then since it was interrupted, it was turned into this chronic mental illness. And I think I mentioned that now that I've been able to avoid the hospital at least this once, I feel more free. I feel like I can move to a small town and not need to be near a major psych ward. So all of a sudden I feel like I have that freedom. Whereas before I would think, well, I need community mental health services and I need a hospital. And maybe I will in the future, but I at least know that it's possible that I can just handle it myself. I can trust myself to just lay down and wait it out and not act out of fear, which might be having an extremely fearful soundscape of future prophecy, end of the world happening in my consciousness, and just lay there. Not think, well, that means I have to end my life because I'm so afraid. And I watched a video with Jason Silva, and he said a quote by someone else, I think, that I am who I think you think I am. And he was talking about it in a certain context, but my mind thought of it in terms of, if that's somewhat true, then the more I put myself in front of doctors and people who might pathologize me or do pathologize me, I become more of that. And I actually do believe that how we look at somebody affects them. So if somebody's in a very vulnerable, weak, traumatized state, and they're looked at by a doctor who's going to think they have a mental illness, that's going to create that, because that authority figure is putting that onto the person. So that person is affected by the way they're perceived by the other. So in that way, they do become more of who the other thinks they are than who they are themselves. And I heard a story about somebody in forensics who was like very flat, and then a student went in there and talked to this person, and the person who was very flat was very engaged, and all the medical personnel and doctors were like, what, how did that happen? Like, I don't get it. But it's how that person is being looked at. If the person's being looked at constantly by people who are pathologizing them, and they know anything they say is going to be interpreted as pathology, they're going to become flat as a defense mechanism. But then if somebody comes in who's perceived as maybe like a friend or an equal or benign or whatever, all of a sudden this person just changes. So how we look at people actually changes them. And that's why I'm quite against this whole pathologizing people, even though it could be necessary in quite a few cases. But the way we look at a person and put labels on them is going to turn them into that. And even if they are that now, if we label them, they're going to stay that. Whereas if we approach it in a different way, then the person is going to move along a different trajectory. So that's why I don't believe in the whole, I have a mental illness, but don't stigmatize me story. I would say I was labeled, I was distressed, maybe I did have a mental illness as perceived by doctors, but as perceived by myself and a lot of other people, I don't necessarily have one. So again, that's why it's very important to look at people with unconditional love and non-judgment. We are killing each other with our thoughts, words, and actions, but we can also uplift each other with our thoughts, words, and actions. And I wouldn't even say thoughts as much as perceptions, just being open. And the more open we are, the more chance the person will flower in front of us. So again, safety, lifestyle design, practice, thrive. And I've gotten the safety down pretty good. And so now I'm designing my life in a way that's more free and flowing, which is kind of the way a manic would live. So manic lifestyle design, which is an easier way to embody mania. And I'm wondering if it'll actually be more difficult to not be too joyful. And thrive, I really feel like more of us need to start thriving. And I have a meeting today about some of the stuff that happened to me in April last year. And then I'm going to an event put on by this guy here with lived experience, and there's a number of people that are mental health advocates speaking. So I'm curious to hear what they have to say. I'm often curious because everybody has something valuable to say, for sure, 100%. And I guess I would like to change the conversation slightly. Doesn't mean that other conversation is wrong or has no place. It just means that I see something a little bit different. And it's possible other people do too if they just take a moment to consider it and ponder it. So yeah, exciting day. Just 2 weeks after the beginning of a major crisis. And that's the thing too, is next time, if I'm able to do it myself, I will try to take video, even though I don't necessarily want to engage too much around what it is that's happening in terms of the soundscapes, though it might be interesting to capture some of that, because I also want to show that I can be extremely distressed and extremely out of it, but then back at it. And so I don't want to pretend that I'm always really well, because I'm not. But by having 4 so-called relapses in a pretty short period of time, just 2 years, I've come to see for sure that they're temporary. They're short if handled in the right way. They're extremely terrifying, but I don't need to be afraid of them afterwards, and modify my life to continue to be afraid of it. If I think back on 2 weeks ago, it was terrifying, and it's scary to think that that could happen again. But I am going to be modifying my life slightly in order to have less stress, because it seems that I see too much. I see and process too much. I really do feel it's acquired highly sensitive personhood, and that's why going to California and being somewhere quiet and in nature, I think, will really be helpful to me. And when I come back, I'll likely try to have some quiet here as well.